All right, welcome to the podcast, Lee. How you going, mate?
Yeah, good, Tub. Thanks for having us on. Good to talk. Me in the morning,
Yeah.
you in the evening there, yeah?
Hey, I tell you what, that actually happens a lot, Lee. Like, for instance, I'm living in the east coast of Australia, and all my podcasts that I record are basically in the morning with a cup of coffee or in my pajamas at night with a cup of tea. Like it's always one or the other.
Yeah, well,
So you're just telling me you're in London, right?
yes, North London. I was born in London. I haven't moved too far away, so I'm just now in North London. I'm about 10
Yeah.
miles outside the city centre. There's not a huge amount of golf courses right in the middle of London, but the M25, the famous motorway that goes round London, I'm at 12 o'clock on the M25, about 10 miles out of the city centre.
Hey, I like that. I like the way you described that. Hey, I'm really excited to kind of have you on, right? Because I want to learn a lot as well. And, as I generally start with all these podcasts, if it's my mental coaches or, golf sports people, like golf physical, people I've had a lot of physios on to kind of educate, us listeners, right? And you are a specialist long drive coach, as well as being a golf coach as well, obviously.
Yep.
And I want to, you coach a lot of high profile people, which I'm excited to kind of talk to you about. How the hell does someone get started in long drive?
Well,
How do you become a long drive coach?
I sort of fell into it a little bit. I had an interest. I come from a sporty background, and my family are sporty, and I'd seen it. I was aware of it. I'd seen the great Zubak. He's like the Jack Nicklaus of long drive. And then how it really came about, I was teaching a lot of very good players, and Joe Miller, who went on to be the world long drive champion, at about 16 or 17, his dad came to me and said, my son would like to have a go at long drive. Would you be happy to do that? So I said yes. Big delighted. I got in the car and then realised I didn't know anything about long drive, yeah? So I sort of fell into it. And that started a journey of study. This is probably 2002, which still goes on today, 20 years later. So right at that time, 20 years ago, I started collecting swings of long drive guys. I could only get some swing sequences. I started looking at fitness stuff. Joe actually went on to be a PT and a bodybuilder, so he went way beyond what I was doing. And I started collecting as much information. I found out there wasn't actually much there. So then I started reaching out to people in America, Hawaii, all over the world to cover areas from training, swing mechanics, what maybe you call mechanical advantage, what could you change in your swing. And I started to build up a big knowledge on many subjects. I then found a genius in Amsterdam who said that TrackMan's algorithms weren't right for long drive. He sat down and explained it for an hour. Still don't know what he was talking about, but he was right. And he gave me a set of numbers that we could work towards. And from every single bit, so fitness, speed training, mechanical advantage, ball flight, I started filling in all the gaps. And I'm still doing that 20 years later.
Yeah.
Go full cycle, I was able then to reverse some of that in that I now teach some tour players and some other players, obviously not long drive swings, but some of the mechanics of speed. So I fell into it a little bit. And the same with coaching, it's something I really quite enjoyed. So opposite us, we've got a putting coach. There's nothing I'd like rather not to be than a putting coach. It doesn't excite me, yeah? But there's a great business in that. So I think from a coaching point of view, it's something I stumbled into a little bit, loved it and thoroughly enjoyed it. And off my own back, contacted people all the way around the world to try and update my knowledge. And in the main, they were very generous with their time. And then I've added me other stuff as I went on from there.
That's interesting that. So like, it's funny how I guess a lot of people you ask that similar question to like weight specific coaches or putting coaches, and myself, I'm pretty much a swing technique coach. I look after the full swing more than anything. And people just ask you like, how did you end up with, tour players? And I'll just say I had one and then another one came and then another one came, and with the long drive, you obviously started with one. And Joe Miller. So Joe Miller, he's a 2-time world long drive champion. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. He's won every title you could ever do, and you could say that I stumbled into it. So I had a bit of luck. I was given a guy who was a freak of nature physically, and I was able to do the right things with that. So I was very lucky. I was put in a position that I was given someone who actually lived in the next town to me. So wasn't even like he travelled a long way. But I've been able to repeat that process many, many times. I've had 150 wins on the long drive tour, European and world. So I've been able to repeat that over many different pros. But I was blessed. I was given a freak of nature who was harder working than any person I've ever seen, and mentally was as strong as anyone else. So I lucked out a
Yeah.
little bit, and then I capitalised on it.
So Joe Miller, he's a big, scary looking bald fella, right? He's got a lot of speed. Tell me, let's use him as a bit of a case study, I guess,
Yeah,
right? So he's 15, 16. His dad comes to you and says, Lee, I think my young fella can smash it.
yeah.
Tell me, what signs was he showing at 15 or 16 that he could be a long drive guy? Like, what were you measuring him then?
No, so this is pre-trapment. In the old days, actually, there was a little sort of baby radar that Titleist gave you that you could put behind the club. But it was highly unreliable. So at the first point, when his dad told me he hit it a long way, I thought, well, you're about the 1,000th person who's told me that in this year, so I didn't take too much notice of it.
Yeah.
But before I saw him, he played in a pro-am with a pro of mine, a friend of mine, and he phoned me up. He said, I've just played with a kid, and he was long the pro, and he said he's just hit it 100 yards. He said he didn't hit it 10 yards past me. He said he hit it 100 yards past me on every hole. So at that point, I suddenly thought, actually, maybe he does hit it a long way. This is pre-TrackMan days, and so he won the European Championships in 2005 with 4.75 yards. So
So
this,
he's 15, 16, right? In
yeah.
2005, how old is he then?
So 21 world title, 20, 20, 23, 22.
So it
So
took him
4 or 5 years.
7, 8 years, 4 or
Yeah,
5
yeah,
years
yeah.
to get there. And what was that process like? Was it just a slow burn the whole way to then?
Yeah,
Ha-
obviously, I didn't know how fast he swung it, but he couldn't hit the planet with any of his drives. So one of the things that we did was straighten it up, and then really this is well before force plates and pressure mats. And what I had to decipher myself is that he's jumping all over the place, his feet are all over the place, he's making
Yeah.
swings that are huge hand pass and really long. So I'm thinking, well,
Mm.
that doesn't look like any pro swings. But then when I started to look at sequences of swings along drivers, they had many of those patterns. And ironically, actually, if you look at pictures and swings of the players in the 50s, they also had those patterns. They were taught out of it a little bit in the 90s with distance through resistance and keeping your feet
Yeah.
still. So I started to pick on patterns that I realised actually were good, not bad. But they were against my psyche at that time of what I thought was doing the right thing. So we were able to get him to hit it very straight. He hits the middle a lot, so I was able to get the ball flight. I was able to get some early information on angle of attack, ball flight, spin rates. But TrackMan, I think, came out 2009 maybe. So at this point, we didn't really know the speed exactly. We knew it was sort of 140 somewhere. And he was the
Mm.
first man to go through 150 on TrackMan and the first man to 225 ball speed. So at that time, he held the club and ball speed records.
Wow. So what's it like going to a world long drive championship, right? Obviously the type of energy, it's just so different to a normal golf tournament, right? Isn't it?
Oh,
And
massively, yeah.
so for the people that don't know too much about long drive, it's kind of like what do you call it? Like a knockout format, like a tennis kind of type of tournament
Yeah,
format,
it's a
isn't it?
bit. It's a bit like, I suppose, in a way, it's a bit like discus or javelin that you have a grid that you have to hit in.
Yep.
That's measured off in yardages. So there's a grid. You get six
Yep.
shots. You get 6 shots to try and hit it in the grid. Unlike golf, it doesn't matter if you go out of bounds for 5 shots. You've only got to get one in. So there's a little less
Yep.
stress on accuracy, albeit you've still got to hit a good shot. It does include carry and roll, so it's not just land distance. Sometimes I think it might be fairer if it was land distance because the grids are quite often uneven. So it's carry
Mm.
and land. If it goes out the grid and comes back in, it's out. It has to, unlike a golf course, if you go out of bounds and it bounces
Ah.
back in, it counts. So if it rolls out and comes back in, it's out. It's also adrenaline filled. So say if I was teaching a pro and 1 out of 10 was calm and 10 out of 10 was peak aggression, you want to be playing in the middle ground. But for a long drive, you want to come up pretty fired up and aggressive. So the adrenaline. It's also very noisy. So they will be playing music. They'll be shouting. If you go to America, quite often the crowd's quite has a bit of beer in them as well. So
Yeah.
But in long drive, you probably feed off the noise itself. It gets you adrenaline, and one thing certainly from practice that you can't do, you can't get that adrenaline in practice. You can't build that feeling. So it's in a grid. It's carry plus roll. It's noisy. It's adrenaline filled, and
Yeah.
it's difficult in that you've got 2 hours, 2 minutes 30 to hit 6 balls. You got to hit him quickly, and there's an awful lot of waiting around in it. So unlike golf, which is 4 hours, 5 hours in the tournament, you might wait all day for 2 minutes 30. So it's a big build up and a bit of a nervous build up to it.
Oh, okay. Yes. So yeah, it is a different type, and obviously I've been taken there a lot by Bryson of recent. He took us all to long drive, didn't he, last few years? But so tell me about, so when Joe goes to his first tournament, right? He wins his first tournament. How did he enter into that World Long Drive? Did you think he was a chance of winning that year?
When he won the European long drive in 2005, Art Sellinger was there, who was the guy who owned long drive. And at that point, he said he'd probably be a future world champion. Joe, I think then, by winning the European Championships, in my memory, qualified for the World Championships. And he got to the final 8 there in 2008 for the first time. So once you go from a European or outside, you're then in America. So in Europe, there's 5 good hitters. When you get to the States, there's 35 good hitters. So there's a bigger quantity. He got to the last 8 in 2008, and he won the first world title in 2010.
And so when he entered, so in 2010, when he gets into that final, did you go over?
No,
as a coach?
No, I couldn't. I was out of the country at that point because there wasn't a great deal of money in it either. I was on holiday when he won it, so I was in Nepal. I got the news on there. Someone phoned me up to tell me that he'd won it. So unfortunately, I didn't make the first one. I've made many after that, but at that time I didn't go. And in that first one, his dad had actually passed away a couple of months beforehand, at a very young age, and he actually wasn't going to go. So he hadn't qualified. And he wasn't in the tournament because he hadn't entered any tournaments because his dad had been ill for a couple of years. And he just turned up there in the last minute and said that he actually got through the qualifying. He hadn't even qualified for that event, but maybe it was meant to be.
Yeah. So he that's devastating. But so in 2010 he wins, right? So he gets to the final.
Yep.
Who's he up against? Who's the big shots then in 2010?
Well, all the big shots sort of got knocked out. He took out Jamie Sadlowski, who was the king of long drive in the semi-final. And then amazingly, he was up against a 16-year-old kid in the final. And I think he won. It's the biggest ever winning margin. I think he won by 50, 60 yards. So a young lad had sort of walked his way through and done well to get there. But Joe had knocked out most of the big guys his side on the way in. And the final ends up these days. So the final then is just a one-on-one. And it was a bit of a different format. These days it's a bit different. You have... So the World Championships on at the moment, I think there's 150 hitters. They go into groups, so they then go down to 64. So they're down to 64 tonight. Tonight they go down to 32. Tomorrow they go down to 16, and then the last 16 hit off against each other, and then it finally comes to a quick end. Is how it works these days.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a big field, right?
Big field. But because Bryson's in it, it will inspire a lot of people to turn up, and it will actually increase the crowd and the viewings on social media massively. So partly, I think there's a bigger field this year because of the Bryson effect.
And I'm assuming that the long drive community appreciate Bryson's input?
Massively, yeah. I mean, the sport was on its knees because of COVID. So his input, I think he's also had some financial input in there. Hopefully will turn the sport around. There might be some possibility of Liv getting involved, which would be good. But hopefully that makes a big change.
Yeah. So tell me on... like when Joe comes to you, right, or when a long drive. Actually, let's just talk about one of your new students. You've got an Australian, Seb Twaddle.
Yeah.
So he comes to you. He's a machine, right? He's over the World Long Drive Championships now, isn't he?
He's in the last 64, which I love. So because it's an American-based event, the World Championships every year in America. Every tour event's in America. I've
Yeah.
always thought there's got to be some fantastic New Zealand and Aussie guys. So Seb came
Mm.
along about a year ago, and he's in the last 64. He's up against Carl Berkshire tonight in his group of 16. But I think he's fast enough to get through. Inexperience might play against him, but I think he's going to be seriously good. If you ask me, next year, year after, he'll be in the top 10 in the world. Is my view on that.
So that's great to hear. He's a big, tall fella. I saw him on
Yeah.
Instagram smash. So tell me, when he first approaches you, he came to you a year ago to obviously improve his long drive skills. What Where do you start? Where do you start with him?
So here's an interesting one with Seb. So he came to me not because of long drive. He came to me
Yeah.
because he had a very fast swing. He's a decent player. I think he's a scratch or a +1, maybe better than that. And I don't think he never said this to me, because the first 4 months of lessons that we did online were all about improving his technique. So I think he was having problems that no one knew how to deal with his speed.
Yeah.
So what you do is, if you get someone who can swing, he was swinging 135, 135 to high 130s potentially playing golf.
So
So
put that into comparison. So 135s, right? So like someone like the PGA Tour, are they cruising around like the
I
big
think
guys are cruising around 118?
Yeah, so I think this year's average has gone up. It was always 113. I think this year's average is going to be about 114.8 by the looks of it. The top boys are cruising at 120. So Seb had a good 15, 16 mile an hour on the fast boys anyway. Cam Champ, I think, is about 130, and Bryson plays at about 130, I think. So Seb already had that. So our first lessons were actually trying to get him to hit it straight and look at his technique with a view of going on tour. But then the tour school got cancelled last year because of COVID. And then I didn't push it to him at all. He said, actually, because I can't go to that, I might have a go at long drive for a while. So then what we then did was switch the lessons from working on him having a great golf swing. And he has got a really good swing. We then switched it to long drive. So I started changing some patterns in his movement that allowed him to move it. So he's now gone from 135 up to 152.
Holy dooly. So where does that start? Do you have to unlock certain areas? Like, is there something that you can tell us, and educate us on, like, if someone he's making that jump, where, how?
So to sort of go through the story. So to give you an idea, if you're using a 45-inch club to play on tour, all the clubs in the long drive world are legal. A lot of people think that the clubs they're using are illegal. So the first thing he's going to do is jump to a 48-inch club. Now, a 48-inch club without me doing anything will give him 2 to 4 miles an hour. Okay. So there's the first 2 to 4. You don't get more than that. You get 2 to 4. So then I had to change his pattern of his backswing. So to keep it really simple, I made it longer, more hand path length, and I made it go more around the clock, which would be called more angular work. Think of John Daly swinging it round the clock. I then changed, so if you got onto, let's say, force plates where you can measure force and motion, there's 3 forces to try and keep it simple. You've got right to left stuff, which is called medial lateral, but let's just call it right to left. You got your up and downs, which are called your verticals. And then you got your AP forces, which are your toe heels, which crank rotation. I've got stuff rattling around a lot more to keep it really simple. I changed his pattern off the ball. So, for instance, just take one section of that. So if you're a long drive guy and your centre of mass, which is this, if I stand up, it's this little sort of imaginary ball that sits there.
Just above your belly button there.
Yeah, exactly. If you were measuring that, the biggest tour players move their centre of mass off by about 1 to 2 inches in the backswing. Yep. A long drive guy will move that by 6 to 7. So you want to be moving your centre of mass. This is just for once instance. What you'd also do is that you want to do that very early. So the fastest move their centre of mass off the earliest and the biggest. And that's done by end of takeaway where they start to change direction. So just to give you, for instance, so I changed his right to left movement, his up and down movement. So Seb used to drop in his backswing quite a bit. I've now got him raising up and then dropping. So if you want a bigger vertical force, you then need to get up in the backswing to drop in the downswing. Yeah. He had a real problem with his hand path where as it came down, he never really kept any width in it. So I lengthened and changed the shape of his hand path and many other factors just to give you a little insight to what we did to try and get up to 150. And sorry, he's 6'7", yeah?
He's
and,
massive. Yeah,
and,
he's
and,
massive.
and a big strong boy who was down the gym every day. So again, what I get given, I get given guys who are big. Actually, he sent me a
Mm.
picture of when he was younger. He had quite a bit of puppy fat on him. He was carrying a bit of weight, so he's worked really really hard on his physique. So if you look at the pictures he sent me, he was carrying a lot of weight. Fair play to him. He's really worked on his body as well, which is another part of it.
Yeah, it's and one of the things there you're talking about. Let's talk about lateral movement. So that center of mass, they're moving off the ball early. So I guess the recreational golfer listening to that would be talking about. We could say like that lateral, so left foot to right foot for the
Yeah,
right-handed golfer, but I guess even the term sway, is a very little term that someone could use. But
yeah,
one of the things that's interesting about what you're talking about there, and I know as a professional golfer that when the tour player gets to lead arm level with the ground in the backswing is when they're the furthest away from the target, right?
correct.
And from
So
there we talk about recentering and shifting back, but you're
yeah,
telling me the long drive guys head back towards the target before then.
much earlier, P2 or end of takeaway. Um,
Yeah.
we know that long drive guys do that. Tour players do it at about left arm horizontal, as you said. If you
Yeah.
want to see an amateur error, one of the biggest is don't do it early, start doing it late and keep going. So if you were on a force plate, the biggest error you see with amateurs, they'll do it late, get going that way, and get it going for so long they can't move back. And that would be a massive error that you see day to day teaching. Going the wrong way too late and then can't put the brakes on it and move the other way, recenter, as you said.
And I tell you what though, Lee, from me, and I bang on about this a bit, is I think people can get lost in calling something a backswing and a downswing. So I think because what are you measuring?
Mm,
Like the backswing, talking about the backswing weight shift in a long driver is done by the club shaft parallel to the ground, the weight shift,
done.
side of it. So it's kind of like I think people get lost in loading up into the right heel, then loading into the left heel, and we see that a lot of really good movers. And I'll even see like a 10 handicap golfer who come to me, and I'll see that little I call it a drift.
Yeah,
From obviously we're talking about Mac O'Grady before we started that from
sure.
left arm parallel, that beautiful drift back
Yeah.
towards the flag. I nearly call it's a skillful thing too, right? You just say, Lee, like you see that amongst people who are athletes as well.
Yeah, exactly. And also, if you're in other sports where you've been throwing or hitting anything, that pattern might be brought across. Certainly, talking long drive again, a lot of the guys in long drive in America come out of baseball, so they have similar patterns that have sort of got on there. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it is a skill to learn. And if you're looking at forces, the other thing, if you look at forces that go into the system or torque, people are always obsessed by the quantity, but they miss the timing point of it. They don't get the timing of it correctly. So they're aware, okay, let's get a big number doing this. So when we talked about putting the brakes on and moving the other way, the actual timing of it then becomes maybe almost as important as the quantity. Because you can have a big quantity, but if you time it wrong and don't start moving in the other direction, but it's a skill. It's a skill that sports people quite often do well themselves, but for a lot of
yeah,
the rest of the world, they have to be taught it. It doesn't come
yeah.
naturally to them.
I'll find a lot of my golfers, like I teach a lot of sports people, like Australian cricket team or a lot of rugby league players. Like they seem to stumble onto my teaching tee, and I find a lot of them nail the pivot down but have just got shitty fundamentals. They can't grip it. They can't hinge their wrists.
Yeah.
But the pivot, talking about when we talk about the pivot, just taking the arms out of play and just how the body moves, I find a lot of them move really well because it's an active, I guess we could use the term athletic type of move, right?
Yeah, I think so. They generally will have the bodies to move quite well. I think
Yeah,
turning quite well on the backswing comes quite easily. You'd know as a coach that quite often them turning through the ball doesn't come as naturally or conceptually
yeah,
doesn't work. But certainly, I think at home, I think you can teach someone a pretty good body pivot in a very
mhm,
early stage of their sort of evolution into becoming a golfer. I think they can learn that quite quickly. They can't put the bits together. They can't put the arms of the
Yeah.
club together. But I think they can learn a pretty good pivot. But I agree with you that generally people who come from an athletics background or other sports, that tends to come quite natural to them.
Yeah, and you get the athletes and you go, geez, you move well. Let's just fix your grip. All of a sudden it's pow, 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 pow. You know, they're off.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about long drive, and then I want to talk to you about some of the tour players you've worked with and how you've helped them gain speed and resurrect their careers. Tell me about your opinion on. I'm I guess a swing technique nerd, and I love like Hogan. I love golf swings, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm an old swinger. I'm an old soul, right? And
Yeah.
trust me, when I'm only fucking 3'2", mate. So the ball doesn't go very far when I hit it. It says thank you after I hit it. It just
Yeah.
gets hit. It just goes thank you as it takes off because I just puff it. And I want to talk to you about your opinion on Bryson. So I remember when Bryson first came to the Australian Open, right? And he was sitting in the nets at the Aussie golf course here, the Australian. And my friend at the time went there and sent me a video of him next to Jordan Spieth. And he sent them to me straight at the same time. And I was at work. He was the assistant pro and I was the pro and he was working. And I said to him, this Bryson amateur, I don't know who he was at the time. I said, with the funky hat, I said, he swings it better than Spieth. I said, this guy swings it really good. Like just looking at his golf swing on my phone. And
Sure.
anyways, he went on to have an amazing early career and then he chased this distance.
Mm.
Now, taking your long drive, I guess, cap off and your tour pro, helping them gain distance as you do.
Yeah.
What do you think about Bryson and what he's done, and has it been effective? How do we look at it?
I think when he first got into it, I mean, if you look at Strokes Gained, the book that came out, Every Shot Counts, if I've got that right, a few years ago, it became obvious, data-driven wise, that if you hit it further, it could help your career. So we see Molinari did that a few years ago, and Bryson did it. So he latched onto it. Also, I think it's something that he enjoyed, which obviously he does do, because he's at the World Long Drive this year.
Yeah.
I think initially it worked brilliantly. He won the US Open. He then and he was driving it long. He went to be the longest guy on tour. I think he was the longest guy on tour the last 2 years, if I've got my facts there.
Potentially, but he also hits it the hardest, right?
Yeah, although
I think there's other guys out there who are longer than him. He hits it harder.
Yeah, sort of. It is a story. This is how we look at the time. So let's take the Ryder Cup last year in America, where we got pumped, got absolutely thrashed. Yeah. Now I was watching the long drive last night. Bryson was putting up pretty much every swing, 209 ball speed to 213 ball speed, 209 to 213. With the added advantage, it was into the wind and he can control strike and spin better than anyone. So if it stays into the wind for the rest of the week, he could win it. If it goes downwind, he'll get turned over by someone faster. So basically, if you look at that, he can control it. Now, when he go back to the Ryder Cup story, when he's on the first tee and he hits the green, if you remember, set the tone for the day. They thrashed us. And then they said, I think the ball speed came back at 189 or 190. And the commentator says he came out of his boots. He's given that everything. You can't see him hitting it better than that. No, he didn't. He's got 210 ball speed. That was a 190. So I don't actually think he's hitting it anywhere near his potential. So remember the rule, as I said, on a 48-inch driver, is that it adds 2 to 4 miles an hour. So he could swing his 45 much quicker. So in actual fact, he's changed his tempo completely. So he swings much faster. He's a golf machine nut, as we know. Yeah, so he's one plane swing, one length club, everything there. It doesn't look like it did at the top. Here he's got much more wrist cock. Looks a bit across the line in old-fashioned terms. So I think he's changed his swing. Everyone in lockdown was on a Peloton. He was down the weight training room putting on 1 or 2 stone. Everyone says he's going to get injured, but he works with the best fitness guys in the world. And weirdly, long drive guys are the golfers I see who get least injured because they're so robust. And actually, if you ask me, I don't even think he's playing anywhere near his full potential on tour. So if you were training for someone at home, building a speed reserve, so say we'll go back to Joe Miller and then we'll take it back to Bryson. Joe Miller can swing at 154 miles an hour. That man playing is a brilliant driver of the ball. He drives it so good. 155, he plays at 140. 140, it looks like he's chipping it, yeah? 155 to 140. Now,
Yeah.
Bryson, I know, has got up near 150 clubhead speed. Now, he's playing on tour at 130 with a
Yeah.
190 ball speed. He is chipping it out there. Now, when you look at a swing, obviously he's quite fast tempo. He's giving it a dig. But I
Mm.
know he's got loads more in the tank. And if anyone at home is watching this, to take speed onto the course isn't about hitting it as hard as you can. Rory tried it a couple of years ago, didn't work. And
Yes.
why would you do that if you're the best driver on the planet anyway?
I know.
So build a speed reserve. So say you could swing at 125, you could play easy at 120. 130. So Bryson can swing at 145, he's playing at 130. Now I know as you look at it, it looks like he's hitting it hard. He ain't even
Mm.
trying.
Yeah, that's a good point. But and I guess like we've seen those statistics pop up from and that's just me. Like I just I guess for me it was a really interesting case study,
Uh,
and
sorry,
the way that I
one other point with that. Sorry, Toby. What I do know because I know who's in the know there. His coach doesn't particularly like him doing long drive because they feel it ruins his iron play. It goes off the planet poor. So
okay.
on all the positive stuff, if there is a point that when he works hard on his speed and long drive, his iron accuracy does go out the window a bit. So there's a good bit and there's a bad bit.
You'd have to think that, and for me, like it was an interesting case study because I think there's a rule of thumb. If you're a college golfer, you've got to be able to pop at 300. Like getting to the PGA Tour, you look at it now in 10 years' time. If you're not hitting at 300,
No.
you
I
can
think
just
even Mark Brody says at the moment, if you don't carry it 275 to 280, you can't play on tour.
yeah, you just
Or,
can't.
or
You
would
can't.
be or would be very, very difficult to play on tour. So add another 10 years, I think you're spot on. If you're not carrying it 290 to 300, you're being left behind.
Yes, and the thing with Bryson is that, and I've really enjoyed his career. Like I love him. I love watching. I love learning, and I love listening to him talk. Every time he talks, I listen. And for me, I think his trajectory he was still very young in the game. Like he's
Mm,
only on tour for, I don't know, let's call it 5-6 years.
yeah.
It's still pretty young. It's still pretty young. Like I thought his progression was going pretty good. I
Mm,
thought it was going really good. I thought he was going to continue to keep winning. And the one US Open he did win.
yeah.
I feel it was one of the courses that was good for him because no one was flipping hitting the fairway. It was
No.
too hard. No
Yeah.
one was hitting the fairway. So for him, it was like it was a long drive show and then go chip it out of the rough,
Yeah.
where
And
no
that
one was hitting fairways that week.
And you're right as well in that if someone was working on speed, the other advantage it gives you with your irons is that you can hit them higher, so they're going to stop better, and it also will
Yeah,
give you an advantage if you're strong coming out the rough. So it was
yeah.
made for him. He could hit shorter irons higher and harder out the rough than anyone else could. That's very true.
Yes. Now tell me, all right, let's talk about some tour players who you've helped gain some speed. Um, I think you mentioned some of them before. I can mention their names, can't I? You're all affiliated with them, aren't you? Was it
Yeah,
Molinari?
yeah.
Yeah.
Dennis Pugh is a good friend of mine. Dennis Pugh is a famous tour coach, and I've got to know Dennis pretty well over the years. I consulted for him. He asked me to come down, and actually, fun enough, he's so forward thinking. Dennis, he was the first tour coach who made contact with me. Where you think he would be the last, in that because he was so famous, he wouldn't do it. But he was the first one that came to me. He was a bit of a long drive fan, and he said I went down there to see it, and he asked me, how would anyone generate speed? Now, to be fair to Dennis, I told him what I thought, and then he adapted that stuff himself to Francesco. A very dangerous thing to do from a man who was
Mm,
probably the straightest hitter on the planet. They took a bit of a risk, but it worked fantastic. Now, he probably wasn't as well known because he started off as a slightly slower player and then became above average, but he won a British Open on it. And he had that stellar year. Won in the America Ryder Cup, was unbeatable. He's now moved to the States and lives over there. But Dennis came to me I told him we had a conversation about adding distance. He went away, took the information, adapted it, and the rest was history. With Molinari, he made some big strides.
Francesco Molinari, of big time. And for me, I've got videos saved in my phone of him working on vertical forces. He's doing a few pre-shot rehearsals where you see him really getting up out of the ground and then coming back down, moving up and down. So,
yeah. And Dennis on those bits, what he changed was he allowed his heel to lift up. He lengthened his hand path. He got his chest working up in takeaway, all the things you mentioned. And those were the big bits that he added to add that speed with the driver.
And I think as well, you mentioned the strokes game book, right? And we can actually measure the risk involved as well, can't we? We can measure like if we go up X and we go wide by X, we're still going to be okay. We actually could be, we're better off at times. So
Yeah.
how much speed did you measure it? How much speed or how much distance did Molinari gain?
I think he
through
added
that?
20 to 30 yards over a couple of seasons, which is unbelievable.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah,
Now,
massive.
what does that do? I don't have the statistics in front of me, but that jumps you up. Where does that put? What does that do to someone's game on the tour?
Well, it changes everything. I mean, he was able to compete. He was able to compete on courses he couldn't compete on. Obviously, he won at the British Open where the ball's going to roll a fair bit further. But it takes him to a level where, a lot of people won't play golf courses on tour because they're too long for them and they can't compete. And there's courses where they're just going to get bombed out. So it completely changed his ability to be able to play courses, play at a different level and compete with the guys who were hitting it past him. So a huge change for him, yeah. Because, if you're hitting, as you said earlier, which was very true, if you're hitting a 5-iron out the fairway or, potentially in certain, because it's better to hit a 7 or 8-iron out the rough than it is a long iron out the fairway. So being on the fairway, as you said, if they can get the miss within reason, and he was always a very straight hitter, there's a big advantage sometimes being further up in the rough than there is on the fairway.
Well, look at mate. Tiger never hit a fairway, and he did all right.
Yeah,
But I remember one time listening to Mr. Robert Rock when he was on a podcast, and he was listening. He was on Cameron McCormick's podcast, and he was talking about when he had a distance over one summer break, and maybe his winter break, summer break, I can't remember, but in the off season, and they said why, and he said, well, I just started. He said it was the Bryson effect, he called it, and he just started just trying to hit as hard as he could, and he just forgot to hit it hard. Like he just started hitting as hard as he could, and then he said to his caddy when they got to Dubai, he said these could go anywhere.
Yeah.
And he found out that he picked up 20 yards over the break just through waking up his body a little bit, I guess you could say, without knowing the details, but just learning how to hit it hard again. And didn't lose anything, didn't lose any accuracy.
That's there's an interesting point with that is that very often with players, so what I would do if I was measuring someone, and this would be quite often, I'd measure their iron. There's actually quite an interesting measurement you can do. If you measure someone's 7-iron, and then to give an idea what their driver should work out at, you can times that by 1.18, and it will give you the transfer of speed of your 7-iron and what you then should get with driver. So when you're teaching, there's a subsection of guys that you teach that are above, say, tour average with an iron, but below tour average with a driver. They just can't get the same speed out of it. And that will be for multiple reasons. The second thing that you'd measure is that I'd measure someone's swing, hitting the ball, and I'd measure their max swing, hitting the ball. Very often with very decent players, and actually amateurs, which we could talk about in a second, they're hitting well below their potential. They don't use it. So what they're doing is they've got into the habit of just chipping it into the fairway to be safe. And there's a fast man living in there or fast lady that they don't use. They're just sitting somewhere at the back. And it's really easy to get into the habit of just chipping it down there. Many players are walking around with a fast person in them. They just don't use them. It's sitting in the clubhouse still.
Yeah, and sometimes you would agree, right, Lee, to their detriment, that actually chipping it as well, like not letting it go a little bit, can actually end up causing, not being as straight at all.
And you're exactly right. There's a really weird thing is that quite often when you put more speed through someone, they actually hit it straighter. I found that many times, not always, but many times. If you add a little bit of speed, it doesn't affect their accuracy at all. certainly Bryson's accuracy hasn't got much off, but that would be the case with many players I work with, where they'd always put up the walls in the fact, well, quite happy to hit it straighter, but I don't want to lose any accuracy. And very often in the main, they actually will add distance, but they don't lose accuracy.
Yeah, no, and I think because they're moving and there's little stalling as well, right? They're kind of rotating, they're releasing, everything's moving as a unit, not independently. Tell me, right? Like let's put our coaches' hats on, right? And I have the recreational golfers who come to me for a golf lesson, and in all fairness, right? It's very little where I think that someone would be a better player by gaining distance. I think there's more low-hanging fruit, in certain times. But there's a lot of times where, I'll teach the senior golfer or the lower club head speed golfer who wants to extend their golfing career and, still want to get to the par fours in 2. And you generally will go away from, I guess, staying in the confinements of a swing technique and trying to generate more energy. Where do you start with someone who says to you, Lee, I'm not hitting it very far. I'm just struggling. My driver's now only going 170 yards. It used to go 220. I can't play anymore. Where do you start? Do you just start measuring them? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'd always get baseline numbers straight away. So the first thing I'll do is I'll get in and I'll measure their 7-iron driver, and then I'll measure what their sort of max speed is if they were trying to hit it. I think also we're recreational golfers. I'll ask this question every day in the teaching bay, Taylor. So I said, give me the 2 speeds that are relevant to distance, yeah. And they'll look at you. 99% of the time, they'll say club head speed. Give me another speed that's relevant to distance.
Yeah,
no answer. One every 200 persons will say, I think there's something called ball speed. What you'll then get into it is you'll find, they've never heard of ball speed. So what you'll then find is that they quite often think the ball speed will be the same as the club head speed. Never heard of it, never done it. So most people who come in as average golfers, not so much good players, I'd actually get, and how I would look at it, I would take the least invasive approach first of all, because in chatting to them, you got to find out what their goals are, what they want to do. So first of all, very often the lesson would be about ball speed and launch. They've come in for a lesson to swing it faster, and they haven't had the lesson they thought they were going to get. Because for most amateurs, they haven't heard of ball speed, they don't know how to create it, they don't know what makes them lose ball speed. And when they've got ball speed, they then need to learn how to launch it and spin it. The other thing you'd hear a lot, I'm hitting it too high. I'm swinging it too fast. Can't swing it too fast. It doesn't make any sense, yeah. Or I don't want. And then we know from science that high launch, low spin is a bit of magic for lower swing speeds. So if someone was swinging 75 miles an hour, the first thing they'll always say to me, I don't want to hit it high. That loses distance. Then I'll say, well, lady pros hit it 80 foot in the air. Men pros hit it about 90, 100 foot in the air. Long drive pros hit it 150 to 200 foot in the air. They wouldn't do it if they went shorter. So people have no understanding of ball speed. Now, and I would do it in a certain...
Yeah, so people listening to this right now probably don't know about ball speed as well.
Yeah.
So you got to basically optimize their launch conditions to suit their club head speed as well, right? Like get the most out of what they've already got.
Yeah, I would do ball speed first, then optimize their launch conditions so they could have good ball speed hitting it low or whatever. Okay. So then I would go into the very basic ideas that a loss of ball speed is against glancing blows. So I would describe it a bit like this. Pass this way, faces that way. That's a divergence, that gap in the horizontal. If we can get that gap together, that squashes the ball. Because if you ask someone, how do you compress a ball? They'll always give you the same answer. Well, I hit down on it and trap the ball between the club and the ground, yeah? Neither of those are possible. And they'll always argue that, well, long drive guys hit up on it. So how does that work? So once they're into it, you got 2 glancing blows, path and face. Yes. Okay, that's in the horizontal. You then got another blow, glancing blow, angle of attack and dynamic loft. So if you took the long drive business, they launch the ball not through loft, they launch it through angle of attack with no loft. So if you can squeeze that position, you can squeeze that one and then hit the middle, suddenly your ball speed is up. So once they understand the basics of glancing blows, then they'll buy into it. And then that will be the first start. So Then what I would do, I'm always thinking I don't want to ruin their golf, so I'll go ball speed, I'll go launch. Then I'll start to think, okay, we're going to swing it. You want to swing it a little bit faster. I'll offer them the fact that possibly going in the gym would make a difference. 99% of them will ignore that and never go to the gym in their life. So we'll get that one out the way. Get that one out the way quickly because that won't happen. And then what you'll do is then we'll look at some mechanical advantage. And interestingly, then I will cherry pick things in long drive that would actually add something to their swing without ruining them.
Okay.
I don't get them shifting off. I don't do all the other crazy stuff. But say it was a senior, for instance, we know over sort of 40 years old, your ankle mobility drops. So we might add a little bit of lead heel lift. We might free up a pivot because we know as you're older, your elastic recoil and your muscles get slower, so more range of motion. We might soften the arm up a little bit, for instance, because everyone's obsessed by keeping it straight, which is a myth anyway, and that might allow them to move the club a little bit further. And then I would put a bit in, test it. If it doesn't work, I chuck it out, put a bit in. And as I've got older in coaching, if I've made a mistake in the early days, I'll keep going with it. These days, I say, this ain't working, yeah? Let's get rid of that and try something. So I'm never afraid to get back to those positions we're doing. And that's how I do it. Ball speed, glancing blows, launch, then start to add bits in their swing and discuss what they're going to do. Because, as I said, from experience, they say they're going to train. So the dark art of speed training, which long drivers are doing for years, which is hitting multiple balls, maybe using speed training equipment, you could do that. But very often the person, they say they will, but they won't go down the gym. They won't practice that hard. So I think it has to be an agreement between yourself and myself as the coach and the client and what they're actually willing to put in time-wise. Very often it's a bit less than they say it is.
Oh, tell me about it. I talk to a physio all the time and, we have some good players that we work with together. And he says to me when we go for coffee and talk about players, he'll say something like, he'll go, our jobs are the same. He goes, we tell people what to do and we give them a blueprint of how to get better, and no one fucking does it.
Never.
No one fucking does it. And
there's a big connection between the only players who will do it are elite amateurs, pros, or long drive guys, because they quite often have a different mindset to the average player.
Yeah, and people forget. Like, I don't think. But actually, before I go back to this now, so to recap, to get more speed right, you're putting an emphasis on strike. So for the recreational golfer, when you were talking about the term glancing blow, you were talking about the club sliding across, so an out to in path potentially, not getting as much club face on the ball. And then the club face is quite open to that. So you're generating, a lot of side spin, glancing off the side of the arm.
And you just can't compress the ball. You're wiping it. You're not hitting it solid. So and also the other thing, hitting the middle of the club. That's a real skill in itself. And it always, I take this for granted because I was a decent player. Is if you ask a decent player where do you hit that, they'll say groove 3 slightly in the toe. Yeah. Look at it, groove 3 slightly in the toe. If you ask an amateur, where do you think you hit it? Say they shanked it, yeah? And they'll say, I hit it off the toe. They've got no facial awareness of even where they strike it either.
Yeah, I that's very interesting you say that, because I will give a lesson, and if I say to someone, was that a bit heely? And they'll go, I don't know. I go, oh, shit.
Yeah,
I was like,
I don't know.
No. And when they say that to me, I go, I usually just kind of cringe a little bit because I'm like, that person's got zero face awareness of what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'll often tell them, like, you need to hit the middle of the club face. Like, you need to hit it.
And 100%. And, it's a skill that can be learned. It's a skill. And I think, even talking to speed today, I was laughed at 10 years ago when I said speed is a skill. Now, everyone has an athletic ceiling. So, if you got Seb who came in, Twaddle, 6'7", he must be 20 stone, fitness freak, very good golfer. His athletic potential's here. And then you got your person coming in who's 60 years old, their athletic potential might be here. But you see that most people perform well below their athletic potential. And there's a skills set that you can do to build speed. So I said it many years ago and people said, that's not true. But some people are never going to get to 120 miles an hour, but they can do a bit of work as a skill and they can add 10. So you don't have to be born fast to get fast. You can add bits to it.
I agree. And I have I got a few little tricks up my sleeve as well in regards to um distance with good players, and I'll often have the bet with them. I'll say, I can get you this 7 9 10 yards further in 2 swings. If I
Mm,
can't, I'll buy you lunch.
yeah,
And like I always win. But I always
yeah,
win because you just can, just through talking about forces and just talk on the shaft as well. But so, and the interesting thing is there, right? And I think there's a lot to learn from long drive as well for the recreational golfer to learn about, like, if when someone gets fast, right? So say Joe Miller is at 154, he has to keep training and training and training to stay at 154, right? Like
yep.
if he doesn't train, he loses it. And he can lose it substantially a lot if he stops training. Now the
So
golfer who wants to get better at golf, if they don't train and still work on the same drills, they're going to
yeah.
lose it.
So for many years to tell a story, and this could apply to any long driver, any golfer. So Joe, because the weather's not so good here in the winter, this is sort of before simulator days and being able to hit balls indoors. So in about November after the World Championships, he'd put the clubs away. He'd go bodybuilding over the winter and get himself really strong. And he'd come back. So say he was at 153, he'd come back after 4 months off at 142.
Wow.
That's his comeback. That's him walking around, and that's him still being strong. And then what he'd have to do, he'd go 142, 143, 44, 45, 46, and he'd climb the ladder again. It takes about 6 weeks. And if you look
Wow.
at a boxer, he might be
Yeah.
fighting a middleweight at 12 stone. And then, if you see him walking around the street, you see someone walking around the street at about 14 stone. That's not his fighting
Yeah.
weight. That's just
Yeah.
what he does. So this is what your average golfer do. They're thinking of getting for speed, but they don't put any effort into it. So exactly as you said, and that would be a standard with tour players as well, or elite amateurs. Had a guy, I took his notes. I saw him 2 years ago before COVID. He was 97. I got him back up to one. I got him up to 109, and I see him a couple of days again. He's back at 97. He hasn't done any work on it, so now he's got to
Ah,
climb. He's got to climb the ladder. And exactly as you said, you can keep it going. Once you've built it, you can keep it, and it's much harder to build it. Once you've built the speed, you can keep it going through the season.
yeah.
Even tour players have to adapt their training because they're not at home. They can't go to the gym. They're playing 4 days, but it can be kept along. But the second they stop working on it, they'll drop back to their walking around the street level again.
Do you think as well, like that speed, that kind of, we can use the term explosiveness, like you got to wake the muscles up. Like they all adapt. Your muscles and your body will adapt to what's required, right?
Yeah.
Like if you put it under a lot of load, like that's how
Mm.
muscles grow, right?
Yeah.
You break them, they grow. You break them, they grow. Now
Yeah.
with speed, if you keep reminding the muscles, this is what we got to do. These are the ligaments, these are the tendons. We got to do this. Bang, bang, and then you're going to keep reminding them that's how we want to be. But if you sit down on the couch and watch Netflix, and even if you just go to the gym and lift weights, that's not fast. That's
No.
not explosive. It's gaining muscle, but it's not fast anymore.
One of the easiest ways for people watching at home if they wanted to add speed.
Yep.
And this is normally not the case with speed training because normally with speed training, less is more. So if you look at like super speed, you do 6 swings and 12 swings, it's done.
Yep.
If a person at home ups the quantity of their swings, so say they go in the net, and nets are good because then you're not worried about where the ball's going. You're not worried about a fairway or the rough.
Yep.
So um, long drive guys might hit, to start them, might hit 175 balls to 250 balls in a session at max speed.
Okay.
Now, what they're doing there is they're building their body and their swing speed up and up and up, and you need to get this quantity of shots going. Now, when someone sees that, they'll think next day I'll try and hit 300 balls, but that takes six months to get there. So if a person
Yeah.
at home set themselves a goal that this week they're going to go in the net and hit 15 balls at max speed with no technique ideas and no worries about where the ball's going, and then just do the 15. Next week, do that with 25. Week after, do that at 35. If you get to a number at height and it starts trailing off, shut it down and then start again. And if they could get themselves up to hitting sort of 40, 50 balls within a 3-4 month period, it's one of the easiest ways to gain speed that doesn't affect your swing by practicing in a speed training environment, by adding quantity at max speed, it will speed you. This is a really easy way of doing it. So you're going to take your swing from 100 to 110, and you haven't changed a thing. You've just
Mm,
trained for it. And you can
mm.
keep it at that level from there. And then what will happen, as I said earlier, if that's your max speed, you can play 5 miles below that, feel like you're chipping it.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? And I love that. I love that, for people to listen to that. And it's like when someone says to me, Tab, I need to hit it fast. I go, when was the last time you hit it hard?
Mm,
You know,
yeah,
like the simple question. When was the last time you tried to hit it hard? Oh,
yeah.
I haven't. I
And
just,
it's a bit like when you look at people that quite often fitness trainers will say, when was the last time you sprinted anywhere? Because as you get older, you don't sprint anywhere, you jog somewhere. So if you can
mm,
if you can shock your central nervous system and your muscles into moving fast again, you can get big gains.
I love it. Hey, Lee, tell me a couple questions to finish up, right? Tell me, where do you see what numbers do you potentially see being hit in long drive in the future? Like, we always talk about our ceiling, like with Usain Bolt with sprinting and
Yeah.
all this type of stuff. Like, are we going to hit a ceiling? Like, how fast is someone going to go and how far is the ball going to go? What do you
So,
reckon?
so from a speed perspective, so I said Joe was the first man through 150 on TrackMan in probably 2008. Martin Borgmeier, Carl Berkshire are now hovering club speeds at about one on TrackMan. This is 156 to 158, 59. So 160 is coming. I know Martin Borgmeier had 165 on TrackMan, which I think would have got to 160. Sorry, on quad, which reads slightly quicker, which would have got to 160 on TrackMan. So speed's up there. Now, the problem with balls is that balls aren't made for long drive and there's diminishing returns. So the other big advantage this week, I can't remember the name of the ball. There's a ball they're using at the World Long Drive that doesn't really benefit the really fast players. So the problem
Mm.
is the world ball speed record at the moment, I think it's 2:35, I think, at
Huh.
the moment. Now, what will happen is that there's diminishing returns as the speed gets quick because those balls just aren't made that. So maybe the club head speed, like the 100-meter records, is going up by half a mile an hour, 1 mile an hour.
Yeah.
160 will happen soon. Probably get up to 165, 170, maybe in another 20 years. Let's see. But the ball isn't really made to work at those levels. There isn't really a long drive ball. So I think 240 ball speed might happen in the next 3 or 4 years, but you need the right ball to do it with.
So when you say ball, that kind of pricks up a little bit. I have heard Bryson talk about the ball a few times.
Yeah,
About he's just like the ball's not right. Like in his case when he was trying to get a new ball to playing or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
So and I've heard of the term, diminishing return for people that are not
Mm,
knowing about that. Like there is certain speeds and certain carries that have been measured, right? That it's just no advantage to you anymore. Like
yeah,
hitting it that far because the ball can't handle it.
exactly.
Tell me, what's the ball doing? Why can't the ball handle it? So the ball is compressing and it's just coming out inconsistent when it decompresses. Is that
Yeah,
what's
and
happening?
the core's just vibrating and rocking all over the place, and it doesn't get a good rebound effect. Um, if you had to say a top flight for a long drive event, normally the internals are cracked by about 5 or 6 shots.
Oh,
It just doesn't rebound correctly off the face when you get to a certain speed, and that's why I said
yeah.
this week Bryson's got a good chance in that if it's into the wind and they're using a ball that doesn't really help the really fast guys, it evens the field out a little bit. But the ball's just basically deforming. The inside is just can't take it and it can't rebound as it should do. So eventually, I mean, they just crack. But for balls are made for the mass market for people that are swinging 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah, I agree.
because long drive doesn't have much money in it, they'll use a ball whoever sponsors them. If you know what I
Yeah.
mean, they're not going to use a ball that's sometimes the right ball. They're just going to use it because they're the people who are paying the money for it.
Well, I hope people sponsor it, and it's sad to see, like, I've heard about the PGA, heard about the Euro Pro as well, just
Yeah,
going down the
yeah.
UK,
Went
which is
yesterday. Yeah, that's a big shame.
devastating. But, okay, so that's, you can see it going up to so what was that, 160-ish soon, you're saying is happening.
Yeah, that'll be happening very soon.
Now, what about you? What's next for Lee? What's going on? What do
So
you see your future?
I'm doing. I'm still busy coaching. I'm doing a little bit of education stuff for the PGAs around Europe and other parts of the world. I still go into work 5 days a week and teach. I don't like the winter so much these days, but I'm still doing that. So I'm carrying on my coaching at the club, doing a little bit of education seminar. I've got an app as well called Force and Flow Golf for anyone who wants to learn how to hit it further. And
I'll put that in the show notes below.
Thank you. Yeah. And so I'm just developing a little bit more of my online stuff. You're the man for that. So I'm going to do a little bit more online work as well.
Mate, online is fantastic. And, I had Mr. Greg Chalmers on recently, and he's, statistically the number 3 best putter of all time since strokes gains come into play. And you can get an online lesson off him for $100 USD.
Yeah.
As if you wouldn't let him cast his eye over your putting stroke. And for
That's
you,
true.
right, for anyone listening to this, you mentioned that you're on Skillest app and it might not be fired up. I'll find that profile and put it below, because if someone's interested in getting, like, to me, I love the way that you simply go about your gaining a distance without causing too much damage to start off with to someone's golf swing. So you're looking for the low-hanging fruit to help optimize that person's performance. And
Exactly.
I think that's super important. Like, when people are starting their distance journey to gain more distance, don't start jumping out of the fucking ground, like Martin Borgmeier. Like, that guy is moving like a lion. You watch
Yeah.
him move. He moves more than anyone. People
Yeah.
know Martin Borgmeier is the guy with the big beard who's hangs out with Bryson DeChambeau a lot. But find out, get a lesson with you online and just really find out where you can optimize it without putting too much damage into your game, really.
Exactly. 100%.
I think it's a good idea. Hey, Lee, it's been a lot of fun, mate. I appreciate you coming on. I'll let you go. I'll let you go about your day. I'm about to put my eye mask on and go to bed, and you can.
It's night time. Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks for having us on, Toby. And I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, mate, it's good fun. I appreciate it. Thanks, Lee.